Welcome back, Spirits of Vengeance, to a Ghost Rider vlog.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Ghost Rider vlog. Today we're going to talk about issue number 68. This also is subtitled The Curse of Jonathan Blaze. We start off with a thunderstorm rolling around as we also encounter the inside of a church. The power has recently gone out and the pastor is starting to light up a few candles here and there. Then in walks Johnny. Johnny is unprepared for what he's going to do to himself. He decides, after a bit of talking with the preacher, that he wants to go to a confessional and talk about his past. To which we, for the most part, get a retelling and a reshowing of some of the imagery we've seen before during the origin story of Ghost Rider. But we also get a few updated tidbits here and there, including the fact that Johnny mentions that while it more or less was the devil, it's not exactly the devil himself, but something, being very similar to the devil. As the details go along, we finally reach the end of the story where he talks about his first transformation, and then also mentions to the priest, by the way, once in a while I get so angry and pent up at people, sometimes I wish the Ghost Rider on them, he says. Then he mentions the fact that he recently came across a man dying in a ditch. That man was a preacher. That preacher also said that his clothes was stolen, and Johnny couldn't understand why a man would kill and steal the clothing of a priest until he saw all that nice gold out there in the church. And in that moment he starts to turn into the Ghost Rider and attacks. The man was obviously the murderer, and he admits to it in his mind, and tries to flee the Ghost Rider. However, all the stories he told of the Ghost Rider he did not believe until the Ghost Rider started doing exactly what Johnny said he could do, including lifting up impossible heavy weights and pushing them around like they were nothing, and chasing after him with a speed that no human has ever known. And finally, in the end, not allowing the man to die, but instead using his Hellfire Cold Touch in order to sear the man's soul, leaving him more or less a soundless vegetable as he had been screaming pretty much the entire night until his voice was gone. To this, Johnny calls the police and during the next morning and says that he found his bike stolen and followed the trail, to which he finds the man laying there trying to scream but unable to scream anymore. He then talks to the police officer. The police officer remembers him from his big biking days, and yes, apparently he still rides with the circus. This must be like their off bits when they're going from town to town, so there hasn't been anything overly eventful in the actual circus itself of late. But as he leaves, he notes that he knows Johnny and that they also have been following this guy, and he has murdered and robbed things before. They just couldn't quite keep up with his trail until this evening when apparently something caught up with him. And then he questions why a man would try to rob a church after also murdering its pastor, to which Johnny remarks, heaven help us if we ever find out why a man would do something like that. So, overall, most of it's spent doing a retelling of the original origin story, but there's a nice little bit extra as a moral to people who would commit such crimes, as something like the Ghost Rider will most likely catch up with you. So we had a moral against vengeance, but we also have a moral here, this issue, where vengeance is obviously probably the best course. but it's also best dealt by people who can actually seek it out rather than someone who has no clue what they're doing, aka the ghostwriter. So that's all for this time. I'll see you all next week.